right, going over to live in just a second.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mo Ivory, and I'm excited to be with you for the second episode of Fair Count's Undercounted, Young, Black, and Fed Up. We're here to bring awareness to the importance of the 2020 census, especially for young people, who are estimated to be one of the most and largest populations to be undercounted. The Undercounted, Young, Black, and Fed Up series is a part of the larger See Me, Hear Me campaign here at Fair Count. See me in the 2020 census and hear me at the polls in November. Today's episode is about the census and voting. We would like to make clear that Fair Count is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and as such, we do not advocate for the defeat, election, or re-election of any person or any political candidate. Now let's pass it over to our esteemed guest, who you already hear and can see, and who I am so excited about today. This episode, we have Fair Count founder Stacy Abrams, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Karen Bass, Congresswoman Ayanna Presley, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and Congressman Stephen Horsford. And also joining us is our Fair Count program director, Ed Reed. Thank you all so much for joining us today to talk about these important subjects. Let's go right to the questions, because we want to try to get everything in this 60 minutes. We're in an election year, and we always hear about how important voting is in our democracy. And we see tangible results in our lives as the result of these elections. In a democracy where voting feels so immediate and the census can feel so distant, we want to talk today about bridging the gap between the both of those. Let's kick it off with the founder of Fair Count, leader Stacy Abrams. Stacy, help us set the table for today's discussion. You have started 3 organizations. Number 1, the Southern Economic Advancement Project, Fair Count, and Fair Fight. Fair Count, who we are gathering under the umbrella today, seeks to achieve a fair and accurate count in the 2020 census in Georgia and beyond, all across the nation. What's the connection you see between these 2 elements of civic participation?
Well, first of all, Mo, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you to all of our extraordinary guests who are here today. And most importantly, to those of you who are listening, who are going to become our acolytes telling folks about what you learned here today. And certainly to Ed Reed, who just does an amazing job of convening us all. I created Fair Count in part because I grew up in communities that were not counted and were not seen. We were not included often in the census, and that had a direct effect on the neighborhoods we lived in. When the census is done, it is not just about counting people. It's about knowing what people need. And after the 2018 election, when I did not become governor, I had a choice to make. I could either lick my wounds, or I could think about what work could be done in lieu of being governor. And what has driven me since I was 18 years old is the belief that democracy isn't just a conversation, it's an action. And that begins with the votes we cast, but it's held accountable by the responsibilities that are allocated to our elected officials and the resources they put in our community. And what we know happens every single decade is that the communities most at risk, young people, people of color, communities that are vulnerable in other ways, that they are the least likely to get the resources they need, and they're also the least likely to get the leadership they need. And sometimes we get extraordinary leadership like we have on the phone, but without the resources to make that leadership as effective as it could be. And we could see that no more clearly than we're seeing right now in COVID-19. I live in the state of Georgia, where we have a population that at one point was the 4th highest infection rate in the world. We have a population that is 32% Black, but 54% of the deaths that are happening from COVID-19. And this is being played out across the country. And that's happening because the people who are in charge, especially at the state and local level, either do not respect our communities or do not see our communities. And the concomitant lack of investment has made it harder for us to recover and even harder for us to survive. And so for me, fair count is grounded in the idea that if we hold the full power of democracy, the ability to elect our representatives, the ability to demand our share of the resources, and our ability to fire those who do not do their jobs, that is how we make democracy real. I do that through voter protection, through fair fight. I do that through policymaking, through SEEP. But most importantly, in this moment, the census is not just about what happens this year. It's about what happens for the next decade. And let's be very clear. The failure to count so many of our communities in 2010 is exactly why our communities are under-resourced and struggling now. If we want to fix the structural inequities, we have to start it now. And for young people, if you want the next 10 years to be better than the last 10 years, you must be included in this census to get the resources and the political power you're entitled to.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. You always have such a way of making it plain and simple for people to understand, and I know folks appreciate that greatly. The Constitution mandates that we have a census every 10 years, which allocates 1.5 or more trillion every year through more than 300 federal programs and provides the data for redistricting and reapportionment. Last week, we talked about how crucial an accurate census will be. Right now, Congress is studying a request by the Trump administration and backed by the Bureau to extend the census to October 31st, 4 days before the national general election. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it simply isn't safe at this time to send people door to door. The extension of the 2020 census would require congressional approval. Let's talk about the potential consequences of this shift, particularly how it affects the census voting and efforts like redistricting. Let's start with Congresswoman Presley. You sit on the Committee of Oversight and Reform in the House of Representatives. Can you give us insight into the process and what are some of the pros and cons of extending the census right now?
Sure, and first I do just want to thank our founder. Thank Stacy for her vision and her vigilance in this work, and Mo, I thank you as well, and also Ed, just for the role that you play every day, but for bringing us all together today. And I especially appreciate the frame around young people, who I think we very often like to single issue. You know, certainly they do care about student debt, and that's an issue we can talk about another time, but young people care about whether or not their grandmother can age in community, the solvency of Social Security, public education, whether or not we have more affordable housing. And so if you care about all those things, that's why you have to care about the census. And certainly on the Oversight Committee, with the census being under our jurisdiction, we have to do the work and conduct the oversight to maintain the integrity of the census. And what I have to say, in my freshman tenure governing under this administration, what is very clear to me is that this administration does not act in good faith. And the census has been no exception. It is clear in terms of what the administration has done to underfund the census outreach according to the levels in the past, whether it's field offices to support people, provide those support and assistance in completing the census. It's been underfunded. And also in terms of their intimidation tactics that they have deployed, like trying to add a citizenship question to the census, which we successfully defeated. But their goal is to suppress participation. So they really have not acted in good faith. Now, I represent the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, a diverse, vibrant, dynamic district, one of the most unequal in our country. I think the 7th is a microcosm of these inequities that we see. It is not an anomaly. We're in a 3-mile radius from Cambridge to Roxbury, which is the blackest part of my district. Life expectancy drops by 30 years and median household income by $50,000. Out of the 9th largest cities in the country, out of the 100 largest cities in the country, Boston is 9th in being hardest to count. And it's no exaggeration to say, and we know when a district is undercounted, then it's under-resourced. And so the cycle just repeats. I was on a phone call earlier today to Leader Abrams' point around sort of beyond addressing the urgency of COVID-19, but how do we get to those reforms, those structural reforms in the long run that will really address these inequities and these disparities? And I was on the call with faith leaders, and they asked me about what I could do about food justice, because one of the reasons why we have higher infection rates has to do with the comorbidities of structural racism and our higher representation of diabetes and heart disease and things like that. And so they asked, what can we be doing about food justice? And I said, the census. Now, why did I know that? Because of the education I received from Fair Count, that grocery stores quite literally use census tract information to determine where they will open. And certainly we need urban gardens and other things like that. But, I said, here's a tangible action that you can take. The census impacts money for our schools, for our roads, and our representation in government. So congressional oversight in this moment is critical, and we are trying to do everything we can to ensure a fair count. Now, we are in the midst of a pandemic, a crisis within a crisis. It is fair to say that adjustments to the census count, including the timeline, need to be made to protect public health and to get an accurate count. But the question my colleagues on the Oversight Committee and I will be asking will be, is this administration acting in good faith? Because to date, they have had a problematic track record. So we need to be careful. We need to keep a careful watch as they adjust timelines and ensure that it doesn't exacerbate the undercounting of districts like mine.
Thank you so much. And that tie into the food deserts and just how much the census information ties into that is so important for people to understand and to participate. We're going to go to Congresswoman Bass. You are the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we know that COVID-19 is having a resounding impact in the Black community. What do you see as the role of the CBC in a time like this? And how do you balance responding to the immediate needs of the Black community regarding the census while planning on, I assume, many contingencies that we're going to see for voting?
Well, absolutely. And let me just thank the incredible leadership of the founders, Stacy Abrams. And Stacy, whenever I refer to your election, I refer to it as being stolen, because I do not believe that you lost that election. I believe it was stolen from you. And I think it's important to make that point, even in what we're talking about today, because resources are stolen from our community because of the counts and the intentional undercount. When it comes to COVID, to me, especially looking at Georgia, looking at Illinois, looking at Louisiana, the ultimate voter suppression, a coffin, because I do believe that some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have decided that, yep, we're going to have to deal with the fact that a lot of people are going to die. And as long as those people don't look like them, although I think they're willing to sacrifice their own as well, I do understand that fair count is nonpartisan and all of that. But even though they are willing to sacrifice some of their own, they do know who is being disproportionately impacted. So I will tell you that the first thing that the Congressional Black Caucus did in regard to the census was to ask our task force chairman, Stephen Horsford, was to lead the CBC in this effort, and he has done just an absolute beautiful job, and I know he'll be speaking in a minute. We had determined that 2020 was going to be such a pivotal year for African Americans that at the beginning of the year, in February, we called an emergency convening. It was an emergency summit. And for a day and a half, we had over 1,000 Black leaders from around the country, and we had two major agenda items. One, obviously the 2020 election, because we don't describe this election as being the most important election in our lifetime. What we say is that this is the most important election that if we don't fix it, we are going to be in a mess for 2 solid generations. And I say that because the Senate has decided that their strategy is to appoint judges, and they are appointing young judges so that they will be there for a couple of generations, and they are appointing across the board extremely conservative judges. And I think they have done that because they have recognized that the demographics in this country are changing. They can't do anything about it. Even with voter suppression, we have managed to win many races. But ultimately, if you control the courts, whatever we pass can be challenged. And so we said that the 2020 election was critical, but also the census. Those were twin issues, the 2020 election and the census. And so now what we had planned after the summit, we were going to go around the country and do regional summits and we were going to specifically focus on where the Black vote was important. One, to turnout, but also for the census. When COVID hit, we have changed that strategy, and now we're doing what everyone is doing around the country, Zoom calls. And so we have been having Zoom calls with different sectors of the Black population around the country, and we are telling everybody, census, census, census. Since we're all sheltering in place, there's no excuse not to fill out your census. And we think that's a very important message to say everywhere we go. So thank you so much for your leadership, for what you're doing. You know that we have copied and tried to replicate what Fair Count is doing. We've had you come to the Hill a number of times, and when life gets back to normal, we're going to definitely need you to come back. So I'm just honored to be here with my esteemed colleagues, and really want to congratulate you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Bass. I know that you will have to drop off in a couple of minutes, so we just wanted to say thank you again for joining this conversation and allowing us to benefit from your thoughts. And, you know, Congressman Horsford, you were mentioned in Congresswoman Bass's comments, the seat you currently sit in exists because after the last census, Nevada was allocated an additional seat in Congress during the reapportionment period. What insight can you offer on the importance of reapportionment and what the concerns would be if it was pushed back?
Well, thank you. And I'd like to first join with everyone in thanking founder Stacy Abrams for all of her tremendous leadership and work. And I feel so honored and blessed to be on a panel of inspiring Black women who I respect. My colleagues, of course, Congresswoman Karen Bass, the chair of the CBC, Chairwoman Maxine Waters, who I had the honor of serving on her committee for financial services previously, and my dear colleague, Congresswoman Presley. It's great to be with all of you, and to my brother as well, Ed, and thank you, Mo. As you said, Mo, after the 2020 census, the seat that I'm honored to serve in, Nevada's 4th District, was created due to the number of Nevadans who responded to that count. As a result, I became the first Black representative of Nevada to serve in Congress. In fact, I was the first person of color in general to represent my state in Congress. So I know the importance of the census firsthand and why I wanted to serve when the chairwoman asked me to help lead the 2020 task force for the CBC. My experience is a key example of how important the census is to representation for all Americans in Congress. An accurate count is vital to ensuring that all of our communities are not underrepresented and to push back against those in power who spew hatred and ignorance and who try to deny us our constitutionally mandated equal voice and representation. And while we do need to consider the adjustment of the census, any delay in the census results, as my colleague Congresswoman Presley said, the delay of those results and subsequent redistricting, though necessary due to our current coronavirus pandemic, will push back the actual timeline for more Americans to see themselves represented in our government at the federal and state level. There have already been concentrated efforts by the Trump administration to deny people of color with the funding and governmental representation that they deserve. And we know that people of color, particularly Black people, are among the communities most at risk of being missed in the census. The undercount of the Black community, even in the 2010 census, was estimated to be about 3.7 million people, according to the Color of Change. And estimates for our current 2020 census put that undercount at around 4 million Black people, according to the Urban Institute. So this results in billions of dollars and representation in our government that has been and will be denied to the Black community. And I say this all the time, make no mistake, the money still gets allocated. Those billions of dollars still go somewhere, but if we're not counted, they don't come to our communities. So we need to ensure that not only are our voices counted in the census, but that every community is heard in our elections. So I'm very thankful to be a part of this session today and encourage every single person to get out and to be counted.
Thank you so much. And I know what you're saying out there. Well, when are you going to bring in the queen? When are you going to talk to our chairwoman? Right now. So while we all knew this year would be big for civic participation, both with the census and as an election year, no one could have predicted COVID-19 and the impact that it would have. With many elections being canceled and postponed and a potential extension of the census on the table, let's talk about how we maintain the importance and security of two major staples of civic engagement when it feels like this is a year where literally anything could happen. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, would you tell us what are the challenges that you see both nationally and in your district, particularly with young people who have such a love for you and who you've been able to reach out to so greatly, that are keeping them from either completing the census or making a plan to vote?
Well, at first, I want to thank you so very much for narrating this wonderful program. But I want to thank Stacy Abrams for her leadership. She has shown that she's a great public policymaker. She's an organizer and a visionary. And you can't find those kind of qualities in one person easily. And she has shown us how to have confidence and how to get things done. And so having this program today and having the vision to organize and to say that we cannot step back, we cannot be intimidated, we've got to continue on the census and make sure that we get the most accurate count that we can get. So having said that, let me just share that struggle is not new to us. Struggle has been with many of us for all of our adult lives, and some even younger than that. And so we're accustomed to having to pay attention to more than one thing because we're fighting on so many fronts. And so while the pandemic certainly is before us, and it is devastating, and the loss of life and the young people who have been involved in ways that they've never had to be involved before, young people who can't go home because they have the elderly in their homes, and this is generational, and we don't know who's bringing what into the house and whether or not the grandparents can be infected, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these are new considerations, and we have to adjust to all of that. But we cannot be deterred. We cannot give up. We cannot say this is overwhelming. We have to do what our ancestors have taught us to do and what we've had to do, like I said, most of our adult lives and even younger. And so, yes, there are challenges. And yes, in my district, part of my district is a very diverse district. It's a 22% African-American district. And so in this district, we have public housing projects, for example. Just yesterday, I was on the phone with the director of public housing, and I said to him, I've decided that we've got to get masks for every resident in public housing. Why am I calling you? I'm calling you because these people in public housing are the poorest most of the time in our nation. They are compromised because they have pre-existing conditions. They don't have money to go out and buy masks and gloves and disinfect and all of that. And so I've decided that we've got to get those masks. And so I said to him, if I find a connection where they are available, do you have the resources to purchase them? He said, Congresswoman Waters, we have been purchasing masks, but we have been protecting the staff. We've been protecting the janitors and the people that have to do the work. We've had somewhat of a hard time getting those masks, but we have been trying to make sure that the people who are providing the services to keep the public housing going are protected. He said, but I hear what you're saying. And I asked him, if again, you have access to the mask, do you have the resources? He said, yes. I said, can you envision a distribution process to get it done? And he said, yes. And I said, I think I have the connection. I'm going to put you together with it. Let's get it done, because we cannot leave off the table and involvement the least of these. And that's extraordinarily important. Whether we're talking about the pandemic or whether we're talking about the census, those of us who understand the history of what had happened, particularly to Black people and people of color, we cannot allow these systems to forget people. and to leave them unattended to. And so sometimes there have to be those of us, most of the time, who will step up to the plate and say, yes, all of this is good, however. And so whether we're talking about the pandemic, and whether we're talking about the census, or whether we're talking about the resources being given out equitably that we're organizing in the Congress of the United States, we have to pay attention, we have to step up to the plate, we have to educate, and we have to challenge. So this challenge, yes, I'm confronted with in some parts of my district more than other parts of the district. But I consider that my work is not confined to my district. My work is confined only to those who are in need across this country. And while there are those who benefit from all of our collective work, who perhaps don't even understand it, don't even appreciate it, that's okay. But we've got to make sure that we direct attention to those who would not get attended to, but for our voice. And so I not only pay attention to public housing and the census count and or how they get protected with masks, but I pay attention to them and for people who get up and go to work every day, making minimum wages, living from paycheck to paycheck, who don't have time to worry about those government people and what they're talking about. And so we have to be honest with them. We have to make it plain. And we know there's suspicions. Sometimes they're very suspicious of government. There are tales and stories in our history about what is done to us and whether it was done on some medical research or whether it was done by the FBI infiltrating our communities. And so they are suspicious. And we have to let them know what we've been able to change, what we've been able to turn around, and what we're still working on. And then we have to set ourselves up as an example. We have to show that we have competence, that we can win, that we can get things done. And no matter how difficult things look, and if you go to bed at night and you're disgusted about something that happened the day before or the day that you go to bed at night, you have to wake up the next day ready to go. And so on this census challenge, I'm ready. And not only am I paying attention to the least of these, I'm saying to our young people and our millennials, I know that you're disgusted with the way life is turning out for you. I know that you expected when you graduated from college, after we told you, get a good education, that you can get a good job, you can have a career. And now it's not happening. And when we told you that you're going to earn good money in your career, don't worry, you're going to be able to buy that house that you dreamed about. You're going to be able to have that family that you always thought you would want, you would have. And so with all of this, and they're looking at what has been going on in this country, what has been going on with the top leadership of this country, the distortions, the confrontations, the stories that are being told, the advice that's being given that does not fit anything or anybody. Yes, they're disappointed with us, but I am Auntie Maxine because I tell them, yes, I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere. I'll stand up to anybody, anytime, any place on behalf of you and your aspirations. You deserve better. Yes, you're right. We told you that life was going to be better. Many of us have worked hard for life to be better. And many of you certainly have been able to accomplish, but not nearly enough of you. Those of you who are working every day and have a pretty good job, the rent is too high. You can't afford the down payment on a house. You can't afford to make payments on the car. And then many of you are now in a situation where your parents and your grandparents need you to become nurturers and look after them because of dementia and other kinds of things that are happening. So my message is this: millennials, young people, poor people, people of color, you've got some folks fighting for you, and you've seen some of them on this program today. It is not only me. My colleagues are the same kind of people that I'm watching every day who are doing this kind of work, who are fighting, who are in the back rooms, who are standing up to leadership at all levels. And so I just want people to know that we're going to get counted because we want our money. We want our resources coming into the community. We're owed this. We deserve this. I came out of the Head Start program. I want that to be funded. We have healthcare. I want that to be funded. We have education from every level. I want that to be funded. I want us to get the resources that should be guaranteed to us. But guess what? If we don't get counted, we're not going to get the resources and the money that we deserve. So young people, let's get going. Let's get in this struggle. Let's get in this fight. Auntie Maxine is going to be right there with you. And I have confidence. I believe that we can win. We can conquer. I believe that we can get this job done. Let's get a complete count. Thank you very much.
Oh, Congresswoman Waters, Auntie Maxine, thank you so much for spitting all those facts that we just needed. I felt like I was in church there for a minute. I was just so uplifted on this day. So thank you so much for that. I just love you. I want to go to Leader Abrams and ask a serious question about ending the census so close to the general election. That could pose new challenges for organizations in the advocacy community and for people living in America. It might also create new opportunities. What does this timeline, the census and early voting happening at the same time, look like to you?
First of all, I think it's deeply unfair for me to get a question after Maxine Waters.
I know you're up to it, Stacy.
No. Seriously, if Ed wasn't on the call with us, I'd just say let's end it now. But I will do my duty. So the very serious question is the right one, which is that much in the way I was thinking about the census and voting in 2018, I think about it now. We know that there are people and organizations that do not want us to be counted. We know that there are people and organizations that do not want us to participate in either the census or in the elections. And this isn't hyperbole and this isn't paranoia. Thomas Hofeller was a consultant for the Republican Party who wrote very extensively about how to weaponize both the census and how to weaponize our elections. And the reality is that he was not alone. While this is not a partisan issue, we cannot ignore the partisan flair that has become part of what we're facing. But we also have to remember that we have people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle who want good done. That's why we have seen both Democrats and Republicans working to expand vote by mail. We have seen Democrats and Republicans working to actually ensure an accurate count. And my belief is that we have to lean into the good, but we can never ignore the bad. We can't ignore the mean-spirited people who believe their only access to power requires the suppression and the oppression of others. And that's the context that we're operating in. And that is layered with the very real truth that for many of our people, participation could mean putting their lives at risk. And so our responsibility is to mitigate that harm as much as possible. One of the reasons I'm so proud of the work that Ed has done, that the entire Fair Count team has done, is that it began its work thinking about not only the census itself, but how the census for GOTC, which is get out the count, can translate into GOTV, which is not about electing a particular person, but about ensuring that the very people who get counted in the census get counted in the election. Because we have to continue to connect the dots. If you live in a community where you don't have PPE, where you don't have hospital beds, that is directly related not only to the governor and the state legislator that you have, it's also related to your county commission's decision about their investment of dollars. If you don't have a grocery store, it is directly related to whether or not the census was accurately invested in 2010 and whether there will be an opportunity in 2021 to get those resources. And so I see this as an opportunity that can easily become a threat. And it's going to be posed as a threat. The threat is going to be, well, if you do this, if you participate, you risk some type of exposure. And I think Congresswoman Waters very eloquently explained the concern, but I want to bring it back to this. If you have a cell phone or a utility bill, they already know how to find you. The issue is, will they give you what you deserve, which is your resources and your political power? The only way we get the resources is if we get counted, and we get the political power if we show up and vote. And having that period of time between October 31st and November 3rd to connect those dots can be, I think, one of the most transformative moments in American progressive history. And I use small p progressive because I want to get better than we are now. So you can be on any side of the aisle you want, but progress is what we should all be pushing for. We can achieve that if the organizations and the congressional leaders who are working so hard to ensure an accurate count absolutely start to include in our narratives the work that is connected between when you get counted, making sure you elect people to do the right thing with that information. Because once that count is finished, it's going to go into the hands of legislators who are going to make decisions about whether the resources are allocated properly, about the lines that get drawn for your school board, for your county commission, for your mayor, for your city council, for your state legislature. It's going to determine the next 10 years of your life. And if we're being honest, it's going to determine the future of our country, because the demographic changes that will be recorded in the census are not only demographics about the race and ethnicity of our people, it's about the age of our people. And if young people are not counted, the needs that you have will not be realized. There will be no early investment in the work that you need when you're 5 years out and you suddenly realize I need access to affordable housing. If you were not counted, they will not have the resources in place for you to take advantage of them. But more importantly, if you were not counted and not included in the political process, you can't elect someone like an Ayanna Pressley who sees you and says, I'm going to spend every day of my waking life making sure you're heard. Someone like Congressman Horsford, who represents a district that includes so many communities that are so often left out. And we can never elect women like Maxine Waters who transform our conversations every day. So I think this is an extraordinary opportunity to connect the dots that starts now. Every time we talk about the census, it should be not simply about what can happen in the future, but what is happening now and how we stop it from happening again. If you live in Wisconsin, if you live in Milwaukee, not only were you forced to risk your life to vote on April the 7th by going to and standing in a line where 50 people contracted the COVID disease simply by trying to exercise their right to vote, you live in a community that has one of the highest incidence rates of COVID-19 and has one of the weakest public health infrastructures for the most vulnerable communities. Those are solvable problems, and you know how to solve it because you went to vote. And by going to vote on April 7th, you protected the Supreme Court that's going to make decisions in your state about the next set of decisions made. And by showing up again on November 3rd, we will make decisions about how we not only react and respond and recover from COVID-19, but we've got to anticipate what we're going to do about COVID-21. Because we know that coronaviruses happen every year. It's just a question of the virulence and the location. And what we know now is that we don't know, and so we have to be prepared. And so that's a very long way of saying this. There is no distinction between the census and our democratic vote. They are of the same piece, because the resources that we are allocated, as Chairman Waters said, those resources only come to our communities if we can demand it. And as Congressman Horsford understands more than anyone, it changes the nature of representation when we are seen. And we know that what Congresswoman Pressley has demonstrated over and over again is that once you have someone who is seen, they can be heard. And when we have people who not only hear us, but speak for us, our futures change.
Wow.
Thank you, my forever governor, Stacy Abrams, and my Spelman sister. She always knows exactly how to make us understand the very hard is very simple. So there you have it. This series is called Undercounted, Young, Black, and Fed Up. And we know that the sentiment is resonating with a lot of young people who feel jaded about what feels like a system. You talked about this earlier, Congressman Waters, that wasn't made for them and doesn't care about them at all. And how do we bring them to the table and get them engaged? I want to go first to Congresswoman Pressley and ask, you have one of the hardest to count districts in Massachusetts. Do you think the same people who are left out of the census historically will be the same people who may not vote? And why do you think that is?
I mean, I think the case has been so eloquently and impassionately enumerated by Chairwoman Waters and by Leader Abrams. But if I could just build upon it and say, yes, the same people who are left out of the census historically are the same people who may not vote. And I think there are many who think that people don't show up and they don't participate because they're apathetic or don't know any better. And that's not been my experience. My experience is that people don't participate not because they don't know enough. It's usually because they know too much based on their lived experiences. And to Leader Abrams' point, we have reason to be paranoid and we have reason to be cynical. There is such a deficit of trust in our institutions and the role that government can play. And what we see are the confluence of systemic oppression, systemic disenfranchisement. And so what I would offer is that systemic problems require and demand systemic solutions. And the census is one way that we get at systemic problem solving, where we are not leaving equity to the benevolence of someone else. This is an act of self-determination and of self-agency and of self-love. Because the fact of the matter is, if you are not counted in the eyes of the federal government, then you don't count. Then you are rendered invisible. And so if you love you, and if you love your cousin and your grandmother and your parents, I mean, I think about young people doing that 10-year challenge on social media, and you see the big differences in those 10 years. Think about that for your community. What could happen in a decade? I think about the city council that I served on prior to my election to Congress. When I was elected to that council, representing 600,000 people in the city of Boston as an at-large council, I was the first woman of color elected. It's 100-year history. And for 2 terms served as the only woman. And that was in 2009. In 2020, out of that 13-member body, half of them are women of color. So I'm just reminded of what my mother told me as she would enter the voting booth and tell me the importance of completing the census. I felt small and helpless for so many reasons. And my mother would tell me as we entered that booth, never forget that we are powerful. And I believed her then, and I still am. I still do. And so I'm asking everyone to think of the people in your life who will inherit what comes next in this country. That's who I'm thinking about. I'm thinking of my 11-year-old daughter and the world that she deserves to inherit. And I will not leave the investment in her left to the benevolence of someone else. I won't do it. So we have systemic structural problems. They require systemic solutions, and that means systemic investment. And that's why it is so critical that we have an accurate count, because this is about our lives and our livelihoods. They both stand to be directly impacted. So for folks who are tired of navigating systems that weren't built for you, who are cynical, I hear you and I see you, but guess what? We don't have the luxury. We do not have the luxury of being cynical. And that's why we have to ensure that everyone completes the census and that we have a fair count.
Thank you so much for that passion. We see it in your work every single day, and we appreciate it. I want to go to Congressman Horsford and just talk about what do you think young people are looking for in our elected officials in order to connect these messages?
Well, I think they want very authentic leaders who know that we can relate to the challenges that they live each and every day. The reason that I love listening to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Chairwoman Waters is they talk all the time about the fact that we need to elect leaders that come from the very communities that are hurting, communities that have been under-resourced and under-valued. And we need to put the people in position to solve problems who come from the very problems themselves. And so that's why I encourage Black men to make sure that we are counted. You know, Black women do their part civically. And Black men, we can do more. And this is an opportunity for us to do something. And I know Black Men Count, the Fair Count leads is a big part of that, making sure that that message is heard, because it is about the power we do have. A lot of times we talk about the barriers, the impediments to our participation. There is nothing standing in the way of Black men being counted in the census. It doesn't matter your current status of, as far as documentation, if you're a previously incarcerated citizen, if you're homeless, if you're working or not, it doesn't matter whether you're married. It's about every single person being counted. And I also want to underscore the need for us to count our children. Fair Count has done a great job of getting the statistics out. And one of the most alarming statistics is that one of the biggest group that's undercounted are children under 5. Think about that. So if they're not counted for the next 10 years, they're not getting the funding and the resources that they need for education, for healthcare, for early childhood development, and so many other important services. And it doesn't equate. I know we talk sometimes that it's $1 trillion in federal funding, and it could be a loss of billions of dollars, but it's $20,000 for every person that's not counted per year. That's what we are putting at risk by not being counted. So we can do our part. And especially right now, amidst this COVID-19 pandemic, where people are staying at home, unless you're an essential worker. And thank you to our essential workers who are out there every single day on the front lines doing what they do to keep all of us safe. But everyone can be counted. And I especially want to encourage my brothers to be counted, because we need to do it for our children, for our communities, to strengthen our families, and to make sure we get our resources and that those dollars don't go to another community. We need them for our communities.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to pose this last question, so we'll have time to take 1 or 2 questions from our viewers, and ask everyone to go around and answer this question. As we know, communities that are traditionally recognized as hard to count are some of the same communities that are often disenfranchised at higher levels. We've been talking about that all day today. This year, we want and need them to be counted and to vote. What's your 20-second call to action? It can be 30 seconds for someone that is skeptical about the 2020 census and also unsure about voting in November. What do you say to that person? And I'd like to start that off with Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Absolutely. First of all, we must recognize that our children are watching. The young people are observing who we are and what we do. And they know the difference between those who are speaking truth to power and those who are not. And they relate to those who have the courage to stand up, say what is needed, and do what is needed in order to bring about justice and equality. And so we must be good examples. And we must not only be good examples, standing on the floor of the Congress of the United States, dressed up in our suits and our clothing that says you are now a member of Congress and this is the way you're supposed to look, etc. You must be one that's in the community. You must be seen at the grocery store. You must be seen in the neighborhood. You must be seen interacting so that people get to know you. Because when people see you from a distance, all they get are sound bites about you, perhaps from television, from the media, and those sound bites are usually the most controversial ones. But when I talk with the women in these supermarkets who are standing and we're looking at how to select our vegetables and they're telling me how to prepare something, etc., that kind of relationship will never be forgotten. And so if we stand up, we have integrity, we have courage, and we demonstrate that we care about people, then we can talk to them and they will believe us. I had a woman who called our office who didn't believe the pandemic. And she told my staff that I don't believe any of this stuff unless Congresswoman Waters tells me that this is a pandemic and that something is going on. I said, wait a minute, we can't have that. And so everything that I do has to be about truth and honesty, no matter how bad it is, no matter how good it is. We have to be good examples. I say to folks, voting is our power. When you call me and you tell me that you have a relative in prison and that relative is ill and can't get any help or should be moved to another place so we can be closer to them, so we can visit them, I have to be able to respond to that, to relate to that, to be willing to make some calls. As a matter of fact, I make calls oftentimes that they tell us we shouldn't make, but I'm going to make them anyway, because you know what? I give myself permission to do what I think is right and what I think is proper. So if the rules tell me don't do it, I have to take a look at that rule. And if that rule is telling me don't do something that my heart tells me I must do because somebody is suffering, somebody don't understand. That's what I live with, and that's how I operate. That's my basic philosophy. And so I talk, I organize, I do a slate, I make sure that they know how I'm voting in my district in all of LA County. I do a multi-hundred slate in numbers in order to get out my position on the issues. And people oftentimes wait to see because they trust me and they believe in me. And I cherish that trust. And I cherish it in ways that I will never, ever want to let them down. For our young people, I know you have power. And I've seen what you can do when you decide to do it. So you will make the significant difference in this election. If you turn out to vote, I don't worry, we win. If you don't vote, I'm very, very worried, waiting for the results to come in. Because if I know that the polls and the numbers that are being revealed to us show that you're not participating, I'm not happy, and I cannot depend on what the final analysis, what the final vote is going to be all about. But if you show up and they're polling you now, and they're looking at what you're doing, and if you show up active, involved, talking about what you care about, and you get to the polls and vote, we win. I'm satisfied. Love you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. And we love you as well. And everybody in the comments is also expressing that to you. And so I'd like to go next to Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. What is your call to action on the census and voting that will get people moving?
I mean, again, who wants to follow Auntie Maxine? I know that, folks we're nonpartisan here, but, that's my chairwoman because I serve on financial services. And I'm going to claim you as my congresswoman, too. I think we all do. I think we all do, Madam Chair. Again, just reiterating what I said earlier, because I don't want to filibuster. I want everyone to be able to get a last word in here. But it is about self-agency. It is about self-determination. It is about power. And we've been robbed of so many things. And in the face of it all, we have remained resilient. We have kept our dignity. We have kept our genius intact. And so don't give your power away. And when you don't participate in the census and when you don't vote, you are giving your power away. And we have already been robbed of so much. And as I said, I think about the world that I want my daughter to inherit. And so I want to encourage, people to take their children with them, their nieces, their nephew with them to vote, to begin to foster that relationship and that accountability. That's the other thing. This is supposed to be a partnership. And so this is about you holding us accountable too. And we welcome that. And then I just want to give a plug for the fact that I did actually introduce an amendment to lower the voting age in federal elections to 16. And we see that is trending throughout the country, that our municipalities and our state legislatures, many of them are lowering the voting age. And the reason why I initiated that is because our young people are already saddled with so many adult burdens and responsibilities, taking care of younger siblings, working second jobs. And so they deserve to have a stakeholder in our government. And we were able to get 125 folks on the record in support of that, 125 Democrats, 1 Republican. We'll just keep working it. But I just say all that to say that young people, you are powerful. You are at the fore of leading every great social movement in this nation. You continue to lead when it comes to every existential threat to our country and our democracy, from gun violence prevention to climate justice to racial justice. You're not the leaders of the future, you're the leaders of right now. And so embrace that and embrace your power. Don't give it away. Vote and make sure you complete the census so that you can get the investment that you deserve.
Thank you, Congresswoman Pressley. You are also one of my congresswomen, even though I live here in Georgia. I'm picking you on, and you look absolutely beautiful today. Congressman Horsford, what is your 20-minute call to action?
20 seconds, I'll just say
20 seconds.
that, you know, a lot of people are frustrated with what we don't have in our community, in our world, in our country. And one way to fix that is to make sure that they are counted so that we get the resources that we need for our schools, hospitals, funding for senior housing, meal programs, grants for small businesses, opportunities for young people to pursue an education, higher education, and workforce training. This is what comes with completing the census. And as Stacy Abrams said, they have this information, the utility company and the cell company. We give more information than what the census is trying to get to other platforms. But complete the census, do it for yourself, make sure that we're counted, and trust Black women.
And yes, and if you don't find absolutely, that's such a thank you. That is a wonderful segue. I also wanted to say that they not only can find you through your phone bill and through other means, but you know, right there with your postings on Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere else. So if you're doing that, they can find you. Speaking of Black men, I want to go right to bring into this conversation someone who's doing all the work on the ground and has been with Fair Count and is in fact in charge of our Black Men Count movement. So Ed, welcome Ed Reed to this conversation. He's so been patiently listening. And I just wanted to ask you to just talk a second about your work and what your call to action is when you're on the ground every day talking to folks.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mo, and thank you to our distinguished guests for joining us on this call, and to, of course, our founder, Leader Abrams. You know, I haven't been to church in several weeks, but I feel today that I've gotten in plenty. So thank you all so much for the inspiration and motivation to young people like myself. You know, we are doing some phenomenal work, I believe, at Fair Count through our Black Men Count initiative, through our Sisters for the Census initiative. You know, we found when we started the Black Men Count initiative that it wasn't enough to congregate Black men in one place to have this conversation, but Black women needed to be included in the conversation. And in fact, they also were the direct result of and impact of the men coming out. And so, you know, Sisters for the Census has been a really good partner in this work that we've done. But one of the things we found is we have to meet men where they are. You know, we have to go to the barbershops, understanding that now we have a little bit of a hurdle and barrier there. But you know, we were having those informal conversations, those intimate conversations, finding out exactly what their concerns were about the census. And a lot of that has been talked about on this call, but you know, we try to dispel as many of those myths as possible in explaining the direct impacts to our community. In fact, the permission has already been given by Congressman Waters. We have the permission to obtain that political power, to obtain that funding that's really necessary for communities that are often overlooked, that are often underfunded. And so we have that power at our disposal if we're counted in the census, but also if we show up at the ballot box. Here's what I'll say in terms of a call to action. You know, if you're a millennial like myself, you know, 2020 must be our year. Again, I want to say it must be our year. And I know the first few months has been trying, it's been tough, it's been rough, but we are a resilient bunch of folks. Yes. And I can attest to that. We are very resilient in what we do. If you're concerned about the imploding student loan debt, I have student loan debt from, you know, 12, 14 years ago from when I started, and I'm still paying. If you're concerned about your ability to attend college or the ability to start a family, the ability to purchase a home, 2020 must be our year. If we're not counted in the census, we can't expect to have those resources in our communities. If we don't show up at the ballot box in November or in the primary elections or any election, local, state, and federal elections, we can't expect those type of resources or that type of representation that we have from those that are on this call. We need that so desperately in our communities right now. And so I would call to action for our young people is you got two things to do. You can be seen and you can be heard in 2020, and we must do it. So let's turn up and get it done. Because as I think it's already been stated, the information that we're providing to the census, a lot of people already published on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. So there's no suspicion about, you know, the information that we're providing. It's quick, it's easy, it's simple. Your information that you're sharing with the Census Bureau is confidential. We get a lot of questions about, you know, well, I don't want it shared with, you know, everyone else. It's not shared. But we can't expect the resources and the funding and the political power and representation if we're not being a part of the process. So thank you so much for being a part of this movement. We will continue this work amidst COVID-19. We're even looking at a virtual bus tour. We had to stop our bus tour in the midst of COVID-19, but we're looking right now at how we can do a virtual bus tour across the state of Georgia. So stay tuned for that.
Ed, thank you so much for giving us that important information and for all of the work that you do. It's only appropriate to have our last call to action come from our founder of Fair Count, leader Stacy Abrams. So please go ahead with your call to action.
I want to again thank everyone for being on this call. Thank you, Mo, for your moderation. Thank you, Ed, for your work. Thank you to Chairwoman, the Chair, Maxine Waters, to Congresswoman and my dear friend, Anna Presley, and to my new friend who was kind to me before he knew why he should like me. We met at a dinner or a lunch years ago, and he was nice to me then. He's been extraordinary now. Thank you, Congressman Horsford, for your leadership. I'm going to say three things. Number one, I want to just echo a point that Ed made. If you don't fill out the census, let's talk about what happens. Not only do you lose everything, but one of the ways we lose it is that the Census Bureau, if we don't answer the questions, they're going to guess. They're going to guess what the neighborhood that you live in looks like. They're going to guess who lives in your house. But their guess is going to be based on the majority. It's going to be based on the folks that they do see and they do hear from, which means that more than likely communities of color will be imputed, because that's the term they use imputation. They will be imputed to be white. They will be imputed to be like the people who don't need the help. They're going to look at the people who surround us and they're going to guess that we're more like them than we are like ourselves. And that's the challenge of being a minority. When you're a minority, you don't look like everyone else. You don't have the same needs as everyone else. We may all share common bonds, but we do not always have common obstacles. And so if they impute our needs, they are not going to guess right. And I don't want my doctor guessing what medicine I should get. I want her to know what's wrong and what I need to have fixed. So first of all, we have to respond because the guessing never works in our favor. Number two, I think Congressman Horsford said it really well. He talked about the direct amount of money connected to each person. But think about it this way. Everybody in America has been waiting on their stimulus checks. And there are a lot of folks who aren't getting that check because the address is wrong. They don't have a bank account. They are on SNAP benefits and it's being computed wrong. They didn't file taxes because they didn't make enough money. Imagine that every single year for the next 10 years, your stimulus check never arrives. That's what the census is. It's the stimulus check that actually gives us the resources we need to fix our communities, to pay for our kids to go to school. It's the money that didn't show up, which is why your classroom is overcrowded and the neighbors who live on the other side of the track go to cathedrals for their schools. If we don't count, then our stimulus checks never arrive. And just remember, they haven't been arriving for the last 50 years. We need that money now more than ever. And that brings me to the last piece. I know a lot of folks are cynical, and that cynicism is warranted. Maxine Waters said it best. We haven't had the kind of leadership we need. But what Chairman Waters tells you, you also have to think about Ayanna Presley and what she represents. 20 years ago, Ayanna Presley would have been one person. She may have been two people who managed to navigate the waters and get to Congress or get to City Council. But because of the work that's been happening for the last 60, 70, 150 years, every time we've been allowed to participate in the process, things have gotten better and they've started to change. People ask me why I didn't just go into the fetal position after I didn't win, and why I talk about the fact that we won even though I'm not the governor. I'm not confused. It's because we changed what Georgia looks like. We changed how people think of themselves. We created a multiracial coalition that challenged the very nature of power, and we came, excuse my French, damn close to pulling it off. But even though I didn't become the governor of Georgia, we flipped 16 seats that are now held by people who a decade ago would never have been thought of as potential leaders. We sent a Black woman to Congress who is a gun control and gun safety advocate in the seat of one of the men who helped create the debacle we live in now. And we have people like Chairman Waters, someone who's been a fighter for decades, but who now holds the gavel to make decisions. This is an incremental game. And I don't mean game as in it's fun. I mean game as in this is a power play. And we have watched people play this with intention for decades. We have finally gotten ourselves in the game. We have finally started to change what leadership looks like. It's not going to look like me. It's not going to look like Ayanna or Stephen or Maxine. It's going to look like you, but only if we start playing our part now. Cynicism says it's a rigged game, so let me stay out of it. I say it's a rigged game, so let me take control of it. Because the more of us who decide we're going to put our chips in and we're going to do the work, we're going to vote, we're going to show up, we start to change things. I may not have become governor, but I made it incredibly difficult for them to stop it from happening. And if we keep fighting, if we keep investing, if we keep showing up, and particularly if young people own the power they possess, then you will control the future that you will inherit, and that's your call to action. Take your ownership, take your future, and make it work. Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow.
I'm not only the moderator, I'm a customer too.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Stacy. It's always so uplifting to hear from you. I don't know any other word. Thank you for tuning in for the second episode, folks. That's it. We've gone over the hour, and I know that we have to wrap up. And there were so many questions you had. You've been an amazing audience. Put your questions in the comments and we'll answer them. We weren't able to get to it today right here, but we will answer those questions. So thank you for coming for the second episode of Undercounted, Young, Black, and Fed Up. And I just want to thank each of you for participating so much from the bottom of my heart. That is, of course, our leader, Stacy Abrams, Congresswoman Ayanna Presley, Congressman Stephen Horsford, Ed Reed from Fair Count, and of course, Chairwoman Maxine Waters. Thank you to those at home who are turning in via Facebook Live to our discussion. We hope you learned something new about the census and about voting, and that you'll participate in both. We hope all of you watching will join us again next week right here on Tuesday, May 12th at 2 p.m. for our next episode. Remember that you can fill out your census on www.my2020census.gov, my2020census.gov, if you have not already done so. Please just go do it. Get the money and get the power. Until next time, please follow Fair Count at Fair Count on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. Have a great day.
Thank you.